Good morning, everyone. It is so good to be in Oklahoma this morning. I told the Sunday school classes until a couple of years ago I had never been in Oklahoma, but I knew a lot of people from Oklahoma, and every one of them were like the nicest people anywhere. And in fact, I asked some of them, is everybody this nice in Oklahoma? And they just sort of smile at me. So don't ruin Oklahoma's reputation on me this morning. I don't know if everybody's nice in Oklahoma or if I've just met all the nice ones. But either way, it's so good to be with you this morning, and most of all, to sense the presence of the Lord here with us. Don't you love your pastor, your pastors? Truly, don't you? He just has the most kind and gracious spirit. And Pastor Brady, thank you for this invitation. I've been doing this for a long time now, that is, preaching the gospel. And I told my wife yesterday before I left home, I said, I don't want this just to get old on me. I got a little choked up before I left the house. It truly is a privilege to represent Jesus this morning. And I really don't care if you remember who I am or not, but I hope you'll fall more in love with Jesus this morning and what he's doing and what he's all up about in the world. How about it? Can we go there? A considerable portion of your Faith Promise giving supports the Church of the Nazarene's evangelistic initiatives around the world. I thought you might like to see one little glimpse of the effect. There on the left, the Church of the Nazarene went to Africa. 1908 was the beginning of the Church of the Nazarene in Africa. After 72 years, we were in 9 countries in Africa. But I want you to look at that on the right. We are now, in the last 45 years, what has happened there? We are now in 45 countries in Africa, and just last week's report, brand new number, we now have more than 1 million official Nazarene members in Africa. More Nazarenes in Africa than anywhere else in the world, and it's because of the support that you've given. Let's just dig down just a little bit, go to one little country in Western Africa, a little country of Benin, 11 million people, not very big. We went there 1998, missionary John Seaman. So we're just talking 27, 28 years ago. Missionary John Seaman officially put the Church of the Nazarene, registered the Church of the Nazarene there in Benin. We started flat-footed. In other words, we didn't have anybody. It wasn't like we had some big group to start with. I want you to hear what's going on there now. We now have 3 districts in Africa. That's a compilation of churches together working to share the gospel. Catch this now. This last year in the Benin Atlantic District, they baptized on one district 6,702 brand new believers in Jesus Christ. On the Okpara district, the Benin Okpara district, they baptized 17,945 brand new believers. And in the Punjabi district, they baptized 31,003 brand new believers. This little tiny country. We now have more than 1,000 churches in Benin and 140,000 adult members there, and the church just continues to spread. And you've been part of that by your giving and by sending missionaries and the gospel going out. You have been part of that. And so we celebrate, and I want just to express on behalf of the global Church of the Nazarene, thank you. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your prayers. The gospel is bearing fruit all over the world, just as it's doing right here in Sapulpa. God bless you and thank you. You ever see those people who talk about a note to your younger self? I was thinking recently, if I had to write one to me, it would probably go along these lines. At least one of the top ones would be this. In fact, I'd say it would be the top one. The best things you will experience in life with the Lord are not things you planned, but will be those things the Lord providentially arranges He just puts stuff in front of you and says, here, this is for you. I've got something for you. I want to do something through you, and I'm going to let you be part of what I'm doing in the world. So allow me to throw out a few threads. Some of you who diagnose people may be fearful that I've got a real condition, and I might. But I'll give you hope. If you'll just go with me here and here and here, I think the Lord will help us, and we'll tie these threads all together and see what He has for us this morning. A few years ago, I went through an extended period where I just wasn't hearing or sensing anything from the Lord. I felt very disconnected from Him. I was still reading the Word and praying, but I just didn't sense much at all of His presence or His direct voice. And it really got to me. It got to me that more than once I just got down on my knees and meant it as sincerely as could be. Lord, if I have done something, if I have hurt you, if I've disappointed you, if I've sinned in ways I don't know about and not made any confession, Lord, if there's anything at all, please show it to me. Silence. Just silence. Leave that for a moment. Go over here. I like baseball. I like baseball a lot. When I was a boy, about 10 years old, my dad left his business career, and he'd been doing well, and became a pastor of a very, very small church outside of Philadelphia. And I was old enough to realize that things had changed, not in my parents' character, but I became aware that now every dollar really mattered. One evening, shortly before Christmas, we were in Kmart. Did they ever have Kmart in Oklahoma? Is that, yeah, okay, you remember, a few of you remember Kmart, you remember the blue light specials and those soggy hoagie sandwiches and all that. Well, that's even a picture from somewhere back. Obviously, the cars are a little old, but shortly before Christmas, we were in Kmart one night and back in the sporting goods, and I'm left-handed, and so I play first base, and I'd outgrown my ball glove, but they had a first baseman's mitt there marked down to $5, which even in those days, that was a really good price. And so I found my dad, and I pointed it out to him, and you know what I was doing, and I think I can honestly say it was the only Christmas in my whole life that I got up on Christmas morning really hoping that one special gift would be under the tree. And sure enough, there it was. There was that ball glove. So some years ago, I was in Cuba with a group from our district in Ohio. Baseball is really big in Cuba, but Cuba is broke, and goods of almost any type are hard to come by. Sunday afternoon, the young men of the church invited those of us who had come from the States, and several of us my age or older were there, and they wanted to play us in baseball. Well, I looked at them and I looked at us, and I knew that wasn't going to be a fair contest. So I persuaded them, could we mix up the teams and play? And I mean, this isn't underhand church softball. I mean, they're playing hardball without helmets, and so there we were. Well, the way it worked, and some of you that have played ball, you can go back maybe and remember, maybe not everybody had a ball glove, and so you'd go out in the field and somebody'd toss you their glove, and then when you came back in, you'd toss it back to them and that sort of thing. And so we were doing that, but I also noticed that they only had one bat. Everybody used the same bat. And so we played, had a great time, had a lot of fun, got all done, got back on the bus, and as we're driving along, I asked in regard to the bat. I don't know how it came up. I tried to be diplomatic just about there being that one bat. And I was working through an interpreter, and so he asked the coach of the team, fine young guy, and he said, well, that's just the bat that we have, and that's what we use, and everybody uses it. And I just said, well, you know, could you get some more bats? And I'm thinking, maybe give him some money, have some more bats. And back through again, it comes back, well, bats are very expensive. And I'm thinking, well, that's probably relative. And I said, well, how much are they? And the reply came back, sort of paused and hesitated, and finally just said, well, the truth is, even if we had the money, I don't know where we could find a bat. And what's more, what I learned was not only was that was their team's only bat, that was the only bat for the Cuba Nazarene National Baseball League. So every day they had to figure out a way to get that bat from one game to another game to another game all over and work it all back around again. So at this time that I was not sensing just the sense of the presence of the Lord, we were living in Ohio, but we were staying in South Carolina down near our girls for Christmas. On Christmas Eve morning, I was up early and quite frankly feeling rather blue. I got to reflecting myself, my life just doesn't mean a whole lot to the poor anymore. And that's not how it had been in previous days. Churches that I'd pastored, we'd collected all those shoe boxes, mountains of them, and we gave away all those Christmas dinners and on. But it wasn't just about Christmas. We'd go on mission trips and come home and tell stories about and find children, whole villages of children without any coats, and they were cold, and we'd raise money and buy coats and send them off to all different places. And it just and ministries we'd had in our community, it's like I'm sure you do, but that just wasn't me anymore, and it wasn't where I was at anymore. And they were just further and further back in my rearview mirror. So later that morning, Mona, my wife, mentioned she needed a few things from Walmart. Imagine any woman asking a man to go to Walmart on Christmas Eve morning. I mean, that's, I know yesterday was Valentine's, and that might be, that's the love day, but to go to Walmart on Christmas Eve morning, please. But I volunteered to go. So you know how Walmart is. They're all about the same. You walk in, and either the pharmacy's right there to the right or the pharmacy's right there to the left. And so I walked in that pharmacy, and she needed something out of the pharmacy. And so I turn and I go in, and I'm in the pharmacy of all departments. And I go down an aisle, and there is a Walmart associate marking down ball gloves, nice ball gloves, and she's marking them down all the same price. Guess how much? You got it, $5. And I just started going through the buggy there, and I'm picking up these ball gloves and holding them in my chest, and she looks at me, and she says, there's more out front. And so I go find them out front, and I get my own buggy, and I'm putting them in, and as I'm putting them in, I want you to know I wasn't thinking that these were to resell on eBay. I'm thinking to myself, these are for my baseball-loving friends down in Cuba. And I knew in that moment, I know this sounds strange, but I knew in that moment that just as surely on another Christmas that the Lord and those angels had shown up to shepherds in the field, that he had a message for them, that through these $5 ball gloves, the Lord was speaking to me. I just didn't know what. Went to the register, and the cashier, she greeted me, and I couldn't say anything, and she rung them all up, and at the end she wished me a Merry Christmas, and I know she probably thought I was an atheist. I just couldn't say anything. I just like a big lump in my throat, and I go over, and I can't get control of myself, and I go stand against that concrete block wall. That's a bad place to have a breakdown on Christmas Eve morning. There I was. I knew the Lord had something. One more thread. Once the silence was broken, he seemed to have a lot to say to me. I enjoy browsing bookshelves at thrift stores. So one morning, a little earlier than this, not much, I found a copy of Barbara Brown Taylor's book, Gospel Medicine. I'd never read any of Dr. Taylor's books, but people that I like to read like to quote her, so I figured for 50 cents it was worth the gamble. In January, I'd made a decision. I was going to start reading 2 chapters of the book. So this was just like a week after what had just transpired here with these ball gloves. I hadn't looked at the table of contents, hadn't paid any attention. We were living in Ohio. It's cold in Ohio like 6 months out of the year. And so I was sitting by the fireplace every morning, and I said, I'm just going to read 2 chapters a day before I start my day of this book. And so I'm reading, I got to day 5, chapter 10, the book title, The Silence of God. Taylor's thoughts on this matter are taken from Isaiah 58, which was initially delivered to the Jewish people some 2,700 years ago. However, never had I felt like something was more directly written to me. It was the follow-up. It was the message, the answer. It was the this is the way, walk in it, to accompany those ball gloves. And since it's a little long, allow me just to summarize. The setting for Isaiah 58 is that the people are disappointed with God. They have been busy at, quote, his house with worship and scripture study and prayer and fasting, and yet God has not been speaking to them. They've been looking for him at his house, but he hadn't been home. It was silence, eerie silence, frustrating silence. And finally their question came out, God, why won't you talk to us? And Taylor writes, the big disillusionment for the chosen people was that God was not where they thought. They thought God was supposed to be with them where they were prayed and fasted and studied the scriptures, but they were wrong. God was not at their prayer desks. God was out in the streets. But then God does speak, and he asks, do you really think this is what I want? This kind of fasting, this kind of worship. No, this is not what I want from you. The kind of fasting and worship I want is breaking the chains of injustice, standing with and for oppressed people, sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless into your homes, putting clothes and shoes on the ill-clad, and standing alongside your brothers and sisters. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote, the religion God our Father accepts is caring for the widows and the orphans and keeping ourselves undefiled by the world. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul records the only instruction. He went up with Barnabas, meeting with, quote, the pillars of the church, Peter, James, and John. And he's giving an account of his ministry with the Gentiles. In Galatians 2, Paul's recounting this. And he writes what I think is one of the most surprising verses in all of Scripture. He reflects, quote, all they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor. You think of all the things they could have said. Be sure you do this. Be sure you do this. Be sure you do this. Cover this. Make sure this is taken care of. The only thing that they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I was most eager to do. And Taylor then draws it in. If God is silent, it may be because we are not speaking God's language, but there is still time. God has taught us how to break the silence and has even given us the words. Here I am. They are the words we long to hear, but they are also the words that God longs for us to speak, to stand before a brother, a sister, and say, here I am. And those of us who decide to try it should listen real hard when we are through, because there is likely to be an echo in the air. Not silence anymore, but the very voice of God saying, yes, hello, welcome home. Here I am. Here I am. Well, I was just overcome and undone. His silence had gained my attention, and now he had spoken clearly to me. And since then, I've just been on this crazy journey. Things I could have never thought of or orchestrated, and I really hope you get that. I don't want you to walk out this morning and think, oh, he's sort of about himself. It's not that. It's this God that just sort of says, here, if you'll let me, I'll use you. So let me share from just one little place. After these experiences, I learned there was supposed to be a Compassionate Ministries conference at one of our Nazarene universities. And I felt impressed to go. So one evening I was standing in the corridor, big hallway there, just exercising one of my primary spiritual gifts, leaning against a wall, waiting on a friend. And he just wasn't coming. When down at the other end of the hall, I see this big group of black gentlemen, most of them extremely well-dressed, suits, ties. And I mean, they're having a big time. They're laughing, they're talking, they're carrying on, and they're just all together down there. And then it was like a parade, and they just started moving down, this big block of them, just moving down, laughing, slowly talking, carrying on. And they get right in front of me, and they stop. And they continue their conversations. They continue their laughter, but now it's just right in front of me. You need to understand, I'm a Buckeye, all right? And we play a little football in Ohio. Maybe not as much as you do in Oklahoma, but I'm standing there as a Buckeye, and there's one guy that's got my attention. This will make sense to you in a moment. He's standing there, all of them suits, ties, exception of one. This is July, and he is wearing a hooded University of Michigan Wolverine sweatshirt. You may have heard there's a little rivalry that goes on between Ohio State and Michigan. A little bit like you got Oklahoma and Texas, right? And Red River and all of that. Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, so I'm standing there, I'm watching them, and I'm sort of amused with all their carrying on, their laughter. But then finally it just got to me. I thought, I can't take this anymore. I'm going to go have some fun with this guy. So I walk over to him and I say, so, are you a big Michigan football fan? And he cocks his head and looks at me and says, Michigan? Football? Well, in that moment, I realized he had no idea what he was wearing, all right? And it was easy for me to pray, Father, forgive this man, for he obviously does not know what he's done. And it was just like the spirit of the great Buckeye came all over me, and I began to talk about Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler and the bands and the stadiums, and here's Michigan. You know, they always got to tell you about the thumb, and and I'm showing him that and where Ohio's at and about our rivalry and da-da-da. I mean, I'm talking about Archie Griffin. I'm just giving him the whole that we haven't even met yet. I'm just telling him all of this stuff. And finally, at the end of it, because I just feel like I always need to make an appeal at the end of whatever I'm talking about, I say to him, so if I can get you some Ohio State clothing, would you wear it? He's got great big eyes at this point, and he looks at me and says, oh, I would be very proud to wear the scarlet and gray. I thought, good. My mission for the day has been accomplished. It's at that point then I say to him, I'm Geoff Hunselman. He introduces himself. He's Chinsinsi Faree, the director of Nazarene Compassionate Ministries for Malawi. And I'm standing there saying, Malawi. Sorry to you geography experts, but I'm standing there saying, I think that's in Africa. So that's one of the most precious pictures that I have. That was that moment, that night, and is taken on his phone. You say, looks like it's a little out of focus. Yeah, it is. And it's a reminder to me every time I see it that for an awful lot of the people living in our world, it's life, but it's not life like it ought to be. It's not life in focus. It's not life clear. It's hard. It's fuzzy. I go back to the hotel room. Finally, my friend shows up. Sometimes the Lord just holds people off. Oh, my. Anyway, I go back to the hotel room that night, and I'm just scrolling for all I can about Malawi. When I realize that in every chart, in every category, it's one of the absolute poorest countries in all of the world. And so I'm like, Malawi. And I say, Lord, you want me to do something in Malawi? I don't know. I've never been to Africa. I don't know anything about Malawi. Didn't even know where it was. A couple weeks later, there's this global leadership conference, and I go to a satellite, and I'm sitting in the corner where I normally did in the dark, and you ever just throw up prayers to God? It's sort of like, well, you're throwing them up, but if He doesn't answer them, it's like, well, it wasn't probably all that great a prayer anyway. And so I I know that probably messes with your theology. And so I throw this one up, Lord, maybe if you want me to do something with Malawi, you could have somebody mention it today. Well, the second speaker, she's up, she's talking, and she mentions 5 countries, and one of those was Malawi. And I'm like, maybe that could just be coincidence, but, sort of in keeping with the quality of the prayer, I guess we would say at that point. And so I'm like, all right. Well, I was out on our district a few weeks after that, and it was a long drive back, and I'd come back, and I don't watch 60 Minutes 4 times a year, probably, and I just came in that evening. I was tired. I plopped down in the recliner. I turned on the television. It was 60 Minutes, and don't you know their big feature story that night was the Mouse House Boys of Malawi. And it's about these young fellas. They catch mice out in the fields, and they roast them, stick them on a stick, and then they sell them to people who are driving by. Well, somebody had gone to Malawi, had met some of these boys, found out that they could sing, brought them to Los Angeles, and got them a recording contract and that sort of thing. But I mean, it was a big, long story, and I'm thinking, that's interesting. Maybe Malawi. I end up at Kroger's. I don't know if you have Kroger's. Okay, you don't have Kroger's here. What's your your supermarket? Reese's. Yeah, that one. Anyway, wherever you go for your grocery shopping, well, in Ohio, it's Kroger's. And so I was in our little town of St. Mary's, Ohio, 7,000 people. Everybody looks just like I do. And so I go into the supermarket there, grocery store. I had 3 or 4 items. I picked them up. I go to a register. I don't know if I'd ever had this cashier before. I don't ever remember him before. And he rung a guy up ahead of me, and I go up, and he looks at me and asks, "How are you, sir?" And I said, "I'm fine. How about you?" He said, "Well, I'm thinking about Africa today." I ask you, have you ever gone to a store anywhere in your life when you asked the cashier, "How are you?" that they looked at you and said, "Well, I'm thinking about Africa today"? I mean, I've never had that before. And I said, "Oh, yeah?" And then I just smiled a little bit, and I said, "What country?" And guess what he said? Malawi. And I'm like, oh my. So I go to our district advisory board, and I said, "Guys, I think I need to go to Malawi." And one of our laymen said, "I'll pay your way if you'll let me go with you." So off we go to Malawi. So I've got a few pictures. We're just going to rattle down through these pretty quick like. Here we go. You've been places. You've seen pictures. These are some of their homes and where they were. Again, it's just one of the poorest places. This was a little church we stopped at, one of our Nazarene churches. They're not all like this. I don't want to give you that impression. Oh, let's go back just for 1 second. But you see those little mud rounds down there near the bottom of my legs there? Those are their pews. That's dirt and mud that they've just built up, and that's what they sit on. We were talking about how could we help them maybe to build another church. And there's Chincincy beside me, Wellington Obote, one of our missionaries is there in the left corner. Let's go to the next one there. I drove way out. If you ever go to Malawi, you got to understand, in a large part of Africa, their part of their culture is they don't want to give you bad news up front. So they said, "We want to go visit a Nazarene school that was started by Compassionate Ministries 20 years ago." And somebody said, "Well, how far is it?" And they said, "Not very far." No. It was very far. And finally we got there, and here's this school, 300 children. They had waited for us. They were all there to greet us. They have 5 classrooms, 60 children per classroom. They're just beautiful children. Let's go on to the next one there. That's my screensaver at home. I see that every day of my life, and just so grateful for the privilege of being there with those precious boys and girls and their families. We go on to the next one. They gave us a chicken, thanked us for coming, and gave us a chicken to take home. And so he sat in the front seat on the way home. And finally we got back to town and found a Nazarene pastor and gave him the chicken. Most preachers like chicken. And anyway, we go on. So we went to another little place. I just got to talk about this for a moment. Little Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, Saturday morning they put on a program for us. I don't know, there were probably 35, 40 children there. I don't know if you've heard of the organization, The Shoe That Grows. It was started by a young Nazarene guy named Kenton Lee, went to Northwest Nazarene University, went to Kenya to work in an orphanage. While he was there, he saw all of these children that had outgrown their shoes, didn't have shoes anymore, and he got this, seeing all the diseases that they had and how serious it was for them. And so he came up with this idea of making shoes. He had this concept of shoes that would expand in length as well as width, and thought that would be the answer, because people would send shoes to Kenya, but it wouldn't take long, and the kids would outgrow the shoes, and then it was all same story all over again. So he comes back to the States and goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shoemakers, I believe it was. Finally, number 8, they were all turned him down. Finally, number 8 said, maybe we can work with you on something. Well, it's a big deal. You can check it out, The Shoe That Grows. Just Google it. You'll see all about that. And so one of our churches had been to Honduras not long before this trip to Malawi, and the pastor said to me, Geoff, you remember, he talked about sharing those shoes. They took a bunch of those shoes to give to the kids in Honduras, and he said, you remember the most excited your girls ever were on Christmas morning? He said, that's how it was when we gave out those shoes. And so Larry and I, we took 2 big suitcases full of these shoes. We got to this Compassionate Ministry Center. They decided how they wanted to pass them out. They gave each child come up one at a time. They passed out the shoes. But it was not anything like what Pastor Chad had described to me. Rather, you see that little girl's reaction right there. Just look at her face, and that's pretty much how they all were. No emotion, no expression, no sense of happiness, nothing. I don't know if you've ever given a gift to a child and you feel like you disappointed them, but that's exactly how I felt for the whole bunch. I thought, what an awful thing to have these precious children here, and they heard they were going to receive a gift, and then this. I felt really bad, really bad. So we had a group picture and then left, and I was just sort of down. Next day, we had gone to church, another place, we were riding along, Chincincy's phone rings, he answers it, and I hear him saying things like, oh, my, thank you. Is that right? Well, thank you for calling and letting us know. I'll be sure to pass it on. He got off the phone and he said, that was the pastor from that church we were at yesterday with the shoes. He said they had to move their services outside this morning because when they got to the church, there were 300 children who had already shown up, all hoping that they also could get a pair of shoes. I said, Chincincy, I don't understand the reaction of those kids yesterday. He said, Geoff, you got to understand, a lot of those kids, they've never received a gift before in their life. They have no idea how you're supposed to respond when you get a gift. Next picture. Oh, wells, you know the value of wells. Wells, it's the water of life. We go on from there. These are just things we did. We sent sewing machine. We started, just our churches on our district. It just mushrooms what I'm trying to say. And so they wanted to help women get in business for themselves. That's what they wanted to do. And so we sent these sewing machines. How many of you remember a grandmother or a great-grandmother had one of those sewing machines that you had to pedal? You remember it? You remember any of those? A handful of you. Yeah, well, the electric's so bad that they requested these because it's more dependable this way than to do the electric. And so these were the ladies on the day they received those sewing machines. A bunch of them in business these days. Let's go on to the next one. That's the mice. That's Chincincy's hand. He ate one. I didn't. He thought they were good. And we go to the next one. There we go. There we go. Even for Sooners, you're warming my heart this morning. Thank you very much. We go on to the next. Are there any more? Yeah, and then COVID came, and I got a note from the director of the theological college there, and he said, Geoff, we're down to one meal a day, and sometimes it's just tea and crackers. And you can't hear people say something like that and just say, well, I'll pray for you. So we sent out a note and sent money, and had enough to get not only the college and all their students, but also all 468 pastor families all across Malawi to get through the worst of COVID. I hope you hear me this morning. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be connected with the Lord and what He'll let you do if you'll just say, I'm willing. It's a privilege to give, to be part of what He's part of. It's a privilege. It is more blessed to give than to receive. So we go on. I know I think I'm about done. We got one. I don't know if we have any more or not. Yeah, let me finish with this. Let me go back to Cuba and I'll be done. So I was back in Cuba sometime later, and we were down at the eastern end of the island, down near where Guantanamo's at, and we were told that we were going a place where U.S. Nazarenes had never been before. And one day we went to a little village called Ascension. We'd taken a bunch of ball gloves with us. We were on an encouragement tour where we were supposed to be encouragers, but you know how that goes. You go to encourage and you end up being the one encouraging. And we go out there and they fix this lovely meal for us, and this is in the pastor's home. And so while we were there, I asked the pastor about his own faith journey and coming to Christ and his testimony. And so he began to share it with us that he had been married and neither he nor his wife were godly people. He said we were very ungodly people and had no sense of righteousness or going to church, nothing at all like that. We didn't do anything like that. And he said our marriage ultimately ended and we divorced. I said, so I remarried, and again, the same, both of us living ungodly lives. He said, but I became more and more miserable. He said, and I was at work, and men were witnessing to me of my need of Christ and how He could change my life. And finally, one day I came home and said to my wife, I think I'm going to become a Christian. And she said, if you do, you can't live with me anymore. I'll kick you out. And he thought about it and thought about it, and one day he decided he'd rather have Jesus if that's what it meant. And so he gave his heart and his life to the Lord, came home and told his wife that, and she was true to her word and told him, I don't want to live with you. And so he went on down near the coast to live. Well, a Nazarene pastor in their village heard what had happened. A Cuban Nazarene pastor, pray for Cuba this morning, went and heard what had happened, went to see the wife, tried to present the gospel to her, asked her if she'd like to become a Christian, and she told him no, again, no. And finally he said, may I at least pray for you then? And she thought that would be a way to get him out the door. And somewhere then he started praying, and in the course of his prayer, she gave her heart and life to the Lord. And by the end of it, they sent for her husband. He came back. They continuing to grow in the Lord. Eventually, God called him to preach. This morning, he is the pastor of the Ascension Church of the Nazarene in Cuba. They have these 4 beautiful children. And little Ramir, as we were leaving, we passed out these ball gloves, and they were so excited about them. And as we were leaving, little Ramir came running up the hill with his arm raised up in the air, in the best English that he had. We thank you very much. It reminds me, Paul wrote, of the blessings of generosity for both the receiver and the giver. Yes, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. And when we take your gifts to those who needed them, they will thank God. And so 2 good things will result from this ministry of giving. The needs of the believers will be met. And I just flicked off my screen. As a result of your ministry, they will give glory to God, for your generosity to them will prove that you are obedient to the good news of Christ, and they will pray for you with deep affection. because of the overflowing grace that God has given you. And that shouldn't be a question mark. That should be an exclamation mark at the end of that. So they handed Jesus the scroll, and he took it and he read these words. For the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. And this morning, the Nazarene himself invites we Nazarenes, us Nazarenes, invites us to join him, to taking the gospel to everybody, everywhere, in word and in deed. The privilege is all ours. And truly, the privilege has been all mine to be with you this morning. Thank you so much for letting me be here. It's been so good for me. God bless you all. Thank you.